Finley to throw. Over the middle, intercepted. Wolford again. Wolford the other way at the 30, the 40. Wolford to midfield. Miles Wolford with the pick. The Heels on the doorstep of an enormous victory. Williams is the running back next to Howe. Play action. Howe will now lob it down the near side. Newsome with a man all over him. Pins the ball against the back of the defender and brings it in. Heels can get a first down at the 3. Howe, pump fake to the right. Now he's going to run to the left. Howe at the 5. Takes the shot. Pinballing off the chains for the touchdown. Howe showing the toughness for 6. Cardinals down 4, 35-31. May has the shotgun snap. Pressure coming. Rolls to the right. Throws to the end zone. Touchdown! Touchdown, Antoine Green! 16 seconds to go. No flag. Snapping it off the 8-yard line. May pulls it right for over the mark. Now he's going to throw it and score! Christian May throws it to Paysor in the end zone for the touchdown. May throws this one through left-handed. Was rolling out on the run and threw it left-handed. Bernard fields it at the 26. Heading to the far side. Theo at the 35. Theo, he's at the 50. No, he's not. Yes, he is. Theo, he's going to take it for a touchdown. Are you kidding me?
What's going on, guys? Welcome into another edition of the Heel Tough Blog podcast. It's your host, Anthony Pagnotta, here with you guys as always. And today on this edition of the podcast, it's time to dive into the loss for Carolina to the Virginia Cavaliers, as close to a win as it gets for Carolina, literally inches away from stealing a victory over Virginia, avenging the 2023 loss, and getting Carolina turned back in the right direction this season. But unfortunately, it was not to be the case for Carolina. That was, they get turned away at about the half-inch line. So we'll go over that. We'll discuss whether or not it was the correct choice by Carolina to go for 2 there, or if Carolina should have been more conservative and potentially went to a second overtime. We'll also talk about all the missed opportunities for Carolina in this game that could have won them the game in regulation as opposed to having to go to overtime. Some red zone issues for the Tar Heels, and ultimately a great day for the defensive side of the football for a second straight week. So plenty to talk about here on this edition of the show. Also, at the end, are going to update you on a commitment in the 2026 class. Carolina flips a player from Penn State, or officially flips him from Penn State. He had been decommitted for about 2 weeks, but Carolina ends up landing his commitment. And then we have to check on the guys in the NFL because we haven't been talking about it over the last couple of weeks, and that's on me. We should have been talking about how well Drake Maye is performing, Javonte Williams having some success as well, but mainly going to focus on just what Drake Maye is doing this year and how he's got himself potentially in the MVP conversation in the NFL. That's how amazing he has been playing. But as I mentioned, let's start by breaking down what happened in the game on Saturday for Carolina in Kenan Stadium. They came very close, literally happened right in front of us, inches away from a win for Carolina. And they fall 17-16 in overtime to the Virginia Cavaliers. And the first thing that we got to talk about is very simple. Was it the right choice to go for 2? I immediately, the minute that Carolina scored the touchdown, put 2 fingers in the air and said, let's go for 2. I thought that was Carolina's chance to steal the game. I know that Virginia isn't the most talented team. There were some people making the argument that this wasn't like Clemson back in 2019, that this team wasn't nearly as talented and that Carolina's defense have been playing incredibly well the entire game. But it just looked like in that overtime period, their defense got a little worn down. You could see that Virginia was starting to be able to run the ball on them just a little bit based off of what we saw on those first few carries of the drive that eventually led to a touchdown for Virginia. So mean, to me, it felt like that was the right decision at that time. You had all the momentum going at that moment, and if you went into a second overtime, you were going to have to go for two anyways. So it just felt like that was Carolina's chance to be able to steal that game there against the Virginia Cavaliers, pull a massive upset, and avenge that loss in 2023. So I'm with the coaching staff on what they did. In terms of the play call, I think there are some people that didn't love it. There's some people that are still, confused as to what exactly happened, leading to Gio having to throw the ball to Benjamin Hall out of everybody that was going out for the pass there. But I thought it was the right decision to go for two. What about you?
No, it was the only decision I felt like, because it's one of the rare times we've seen this coaching staff play to win the game and send a message of confidence to their players that we believe in you. Let's go win the football game right here, right now. Yes, if you go to the second overtime and you score a touchdown, you have to go for two anyway, so you might as well go for two now. And I think that's a trend you've started to see around the country since this new playoff or this new overtime format's kind of been adopted, to where if the second team scores a touchdown, they just kind of go for it right there anyway, because you got to go for two on the next overtime. Well, let's not put fate in hands. Let's just go do the thing right now. And the concern was the play call, but I think that's you're not. I think Carolina was going to run the ball. I don't think they were running it enough to just say, hey, hand the ball to Hall, Gallus, June, whoever. You're going to put the ball in the air. It's just a matter of, okay, who are you going to throw the football to? And if there's, one thing Carolina does well is it's that they throw the football to the running backs, because they throw to the running back quite often. I don't know if there's a team in the country that throws the football more willing to its running back than Carolina's offense. The bigger issue is that you send Gio Lopez on a straight drop, he gets flushed, and he's 10, 15 yards behind the original line of scrimmage when he makes the throw. So just an incredible effort by Hall to get as close as he got to anyway, because when he initially caught the football, I thought there was no chance he was going to get close to making it as close as he was, and he comes up a yard short. So I think you really got to credit the coaching staff for putting that aggressive mindset in. I think it sends the right kind of message to the players. I think it sent the right kind of message to us, the fans, that were, for the most part, wanting Carolina to go for two in that situation. It just comes down to a lack of execution in terms of getting the play across the goal line. And what really hurt was, you had a chance to beat a rival. You had a chance to get a signature win. And for the first time really all year, I guess following the Cal game, there was just a different level of hurt watching Carolina lose, because those kids from the first play into the final play played as hard as they've played all year long. And there have been different times where we haven't questioned Carolina's effort, although the scoreboard would reflect otherwise. But that's as hard as a game I've seen Carolina play maybe in the last handful of years. And it's not pretty. It's maybe not the type of football that we want to watch every single Saturday, but you look up and this team has formed an identity. They know who they are. They know the style of football they have to play to give themselves a chance to win, which is low scoring, low possession, really going to muck the game up as much as possible. But there wasn't an identity for this football team pre-Cal. There is an identity for this team post-Cal. And, they both come in losses, but this team knows who it is. They know how they can win, and that's a sign that there is some sort of a culture being built, some sort of a foundation being built, and we got to give credit to Bill Belichick and their coaching staff for not losing the locker room after a chaotic 2-3 start of the season.
Yeah, no, they've definitely rebounded in that area. I think culture-wise, you can feel like this is that was what they needed to sort of turn the corner. They needed that moment where some of the issues that were happening were called out. They had to take a look in the mirror and say, this is not working. And we need to find a way to get this thing back in the right direction. We need to start, turning the page on some of these issues that we've had and moving forward. I think you look at the camaraderie of the team. I mean, the final play, the entire defense is on the sideline lined up arm in arm, or at least the defensive backs. And from what I could see, it looked like mostly defensive backs. But these guys, they fought through a lot of adversity, and you got to give them a lot of credit. They could have just rolled over and quit when, things got tough, when, the national media, and even some of the local media was coming after Bill Belichick and really focusing on the negative stuff that was going on around the program more than anything else. And this team has rallied together behind that. That was a telling moment for this group. And, some things were worked on in that bye week. You can definitely tell some of the fundamental stuff that was non-existent in the first 3 power conference games that Carolina played. Well, it's there now. You're starting to see much better tackling from Carolina. The yards after catch, not nearly as impactful as what we saw in the first 3 games of the power conference competition. Carolina just looks a lot better on the defensive side of the ball, and it looks like they've just got a little bit of life. I know offensively things are still tough, and we're going to talk about the struggles that Carolina had on the offensive side of the ball. But, this defense deserves just a ton of credit for what they did on Saturday. And that's where we can go next, is let's just talk about the defense before we talk about the missed opportunities for Carolina in this game. I think the defense really gave them a shot to win this game, gave them a shot to compete in this game, because without that performance, Carolina could have potentially gotten blown off the field. And one thing that's been amazing to me is how this defensive backfield has really rallied around the young guys that have had to step up in Thad Dixon's absence. This group has been much better, the last 2 weeks. I know that there were moments where Cal was able to carve them up a little bit. A lot of that was done in the slot. You didn't see that in this game. Now, part of it was that there was clearly something that was a little off with Chandler Morris. They said on the broadcast that he was dealing with some shoulder issues, but Carolina still, earlier in the season, they're going to still end up getting carved up by an injured quarterback. No, it didn't really matter what quarterback was out there. They were going to find a way to be successful. Just see Taven Jackson's success against them. And this one, Jamal Edrin had 6 catches for 75 yards. Trell Harris had a nice explosive play, a 30-yard gain that allowed him to be successful. Edrin, a 28-yard gain. But for the most part, Carolina held those guys in check, and then everybody else was really unable to do anything throughout the day. Some throws definitely sailed high, but Carolina was in the area to be able to make plays. And more importantly, Carolina was getting after the quarterback in a way we haven't seen them be able to do all season long. They were tremendous in that area. So, you got to give it up to this defense. This was a side of the ball that after the first few games of the season against power conference competition, especially that game against Clemson, we felt like they didn't really have much hope, and we were wondering why it looked so unorganized under Steven Belichick. You circle back now after the last 2 weeks, and all of a sudden we're starting to see what the vision is defensively.
Yeah, it's back-to-back weeks. The box score would suggest to you that Carolina should have won the football game. You allow 259 yards of total offense to an offense that was putting up the points and the yards that I believe were tops in the ACC, coming into this game. And, it's what Carolina had to do to give themselves a chance. And, they were really good on third down once again. Virginia was just 7 of 18. So you've gotten better up there. And it all starts with what Carolina's doing on first and second down. What got lost in the first handful of games is this notion that Carolina couldn't stop the run. No, Carolina could do a really good job with their initial run fits. It was just because how long that defense had been on the field, they got worn down. They give up big run after big run. Those rushing yards look skewed. Carolina's done a really good job this year stopping the run, initially, and putting teams in 3rd and 7s and 3rd and 8s, but they haven't consistently gotten off the field. That was something that really did them in against Cal, even though Cal was just 6 of 18 on third down. Wasn't necessarily the case in this game. And yeah, when you can consistently get your opponent into 3rd and 7s, 3rd and 8s. One, it just allows your pass rushers mentally to just get in the mindset. They're not going to run the football. I can just focus on my pass rush moves, win my one-on-ones, and go get the quarterback. But it also makes it easier for Steven Belichick to get more aggressive with his blitzes, but also do some a lot more with the disguising of the coverages to confuse the quarterback. And I think that's what Carolina's been able to do. They're getting enough consistent pressure up front with 4 to where he's feeling more confident to send a blitz or 2 more than he was in the first handful of games. And now I think they've also got a little bit more creative with what they're doing on the back end with disguising their coverages, that they're being able to confuse the quarterback, forcing them to hold the ball a second, 2 seconds longer, and then all of a sudden that pass rush is really bearing down, and they're really able to affect what the quarterback's wanting to do, throw the football down the field. It's not easy to give this guy any credit. I think, this is something that Michael Lombardi's been preaching on the radio side, is this progress was going to come the more that they got to practice the scheme and understand the responsibilities. And I think he's right. Because going into the first bye week, Carolina had, there's like 30 some odd practices with this roster. Now that's north of 50 practices, and it's not on accident the results look the way that they look since the second bye week. So I think you really got to credit the coaching staff and the players for hearing the message, buying in, and being asked to do it, and doing what they're being asked to do, which is just everyone do their job. And if everyone does their job, then what does it look like collectively? And collectively, it's given Carolina a chance the last 2 weeks to win football games. And that's something that I think we can start to believe in moving down the stretch, because the Heels will not play an offense as dynamic as Virginia's the rest of the way.
Yeah, you wouldn't think. I mean, you're looking at the rushing yards per game for Virginia. That's the one thing that I think is really, if you're taking anything away from this game, that's what you should take away, is that Carolina, we were wondering, how good of a run defense really is this? Or is this just a team that you can throw the football on, and that's the reason that teams are not running the football against them? That was not the case on Saturday. I mean, Carolina came out, and clearly it was a goal of theirs to stop this run and slow it down as much as any run game that they have all season long. I mean, this team came in, rushing the football for 203.9 yards per game so far this year. One of the better marks in the ACC, one of the better marks in the entire country. In this game, they ran for 59 yards on 34 carries. That averages out to 1.7 yards per carry. And look, part of that is that Chandler Morris, with all this sack yardage, I mean, he had 9 carries for negative 21 yards. But even the guys that were supposed to be effective, Jamari Taylor, 21 carries, 69 yards, and a touchdown in this game. Carolina did a really good job for the most part, especially in regulation, of being able to slow them down. You saw as they got into overtime, this group got a little bit worn down, but I mean, it really starts with the guys on the inside. I mean, even the edge rushers deserve a lot of credit, but really the guys on the inside, I think we haven't talked about them enough for how good they have been defending the run so far this year. And you saw the other day, CJ Mims winning consistently. He had 4 total tackles in the game. Isaiah Johnson, that's a guy that we haven't talked about a lot, but he's been really, really good in the run game throughout the entire season. And Leroy Jackson with 3 total tackles in this game as well. Those guys looked the part. DeAndre Robinson also deserves a shout out in there. Quieter game from him. But really, those 3 guys, I mean, they all had 3 or more tackles in this game, and it just shows you how impactful they were in the run game. And the edge rushers are doing what they have to do as well. I mean, one play that stuck out to me, Tyler Thompson ends up dropping a guy in the backfield for a loss on a run play. That's something that we need to see him improve in, is, as a run defender. If he does, then he's going to be able to get on the field because of what he does as a pass rusher. And I think that you saw those market improvements in this game from Carolina, from the guys that you needed to, based off of what we saw last week. But, You also see the consistency that's starting to build there in the middle of this defense. They are a good run defending group. And now it's just about getting things figured out on the outside, especially in the passing game. And it feels like Carolina's, going to be able to do that if they can get this type of production from their defensive line. I mean, that's really the group that shined the most to me. Yeah, defensively across the board, I thought they had a really good day. Kamori House looked good. Andrew Simpson had himself a good day, had a huge interception on a play that, set Carolina up inside the red zone, gave them a chance to take the lead, one of many opportunities that they had to take the lead. Micaiah Bayor saw the most playing time that he has in the last few weeks and was very impactful as well. Those linebackers deserve a lot of credit, but it was this defensive line that was really able to get after the quarterback. Milcart, Abujade was tremendous in this game. 3 sacks, in this one. So, I mean, yeah, his production's been fleeting at times this year. Really, it's been Richmond and this game where he's had the biggest impact. But he steps up, and then you got the guys on the interior of the defensive line that stepped up as well. C.J. Mims, Isaiah Johnson, both with a sack in this game. Tyler Thompson built off of what he did out on the West Coast and had a sack in this game to go along with 5 total tackles. This defensive line deserves a lot of credit, and we got to hear from Bob Diaco last week and about his story and everything and how he eventually ended up at Carolina. Well, I'll tell you what, Bob Diaco is doing a heck of a job of coaching these guys up. It took a little bit of time. Maybe we should have been a little more patient with things on the defensive side of the ball, but especially up front, Carolina is starting to find some answers, and hopefully that'll extend into these next few games and potentially allow Carolina to find a win or two in there.
Yeah, because it doesn't matter how good your linebackers are, how good your corners and your safeties are. All that goes out the window if your front four doesn't give them a chance to look good. And I think what you're seeing is this group really just learning to play for one another, trust one another, and just do what they're being asked to do. Get comfortable to the technique that they're being taught and what they're being asked to do. And just really, I think some of it was just buying in because there's just been so much noise from the outside. You're not going to tell me it hasn't impacted the locker room in one way or another, but it does feel like they've come together. They're starting to play for one another. And we've seen what this defense has done at the NFL level. We know how good Belichick was for the majority of his time as a defensive coordinator. Even when he was the architect of the Patriots, those were teams that when they won championships, it was, they had Brady, but they had a top 10 defense to go along with it. And we saw what Steve Belichick did last year at Washington. It was a good defense. And some of it, there is still a lack of, I think, personnel and depth here that is really going to hold it back from being the best version of itself this year. But assuming that, Belichick is here next year and they're in year 2 of the system and these guys don't leave the program and Carolina can add through the portal, we know they're bringing in a big freshman class as well. I think you'll see the type of defensive football next year that we thought we were going to get this year. And it all starts up front. And Carolina's still doing this. You lose Price Yates, who was still their best pass rusher, on the roster. I think that's what's even more impressive is there's not a dynamic pass rusher on this roster anymore. It's really going to be by committee. It's really going to be by everyone kind of doing their job to the best of their ability, maybe stunting some stuff up front as well. But to still be able to make that kind of havoc up front without a pass rusher speaks volumes. And it could be what, keeps Carolina competitive in the games to come. And as you mentioned, maybe win a game or two down the stretch that we didn't think was on the table after the ugly 2-3 start.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, the way the defense is playing, it would have you believe that Carolina is going to be able to compete in all of those games. And I would think eventually they are going to win some of those games. It feels like for this group, all that they need is one win. And then all of a sudden, not saying the floodgates are going to open, but the confidence will exude throughout this locker room. All of a sudden, you'll have the thoughts of, hey, this is working. What we're doing is working. We're not only, beating teams like Charlotte and Richmond. Now we're beating a team like Syracuse, or we're beating a team like Stanford. Those are your next two opportunities, and those are two really big opportunities. Those are two teams that people look at and don't necessarily think are the best teams in the ACC. They're, probably teams that are in the bottom half of the conference. And so it feels like opportunity is there. And I think the way that this defense is playing, they will have a shot in both of those games to be able to pick up victories. It's just, what do they do offensively? In terms of, capitalizing on some of the missed opportunities that they had in this game, the red zone issues that they had in this game, will they be able to do that? And this is where we got to talk about some of those missed opportunities and some of those red zone issues for Carolina. Look, the Tar Heels, they had plenty of opportunities to score in this game, but they couldn't make the plays when they needed to. It starts with the early drive where Kobe Paysour fumbles early in the game. That's one that really hurts, because Carolina was driving down the field, felt like they were building something, could have gotten that first lead since the game against TCU, against a power conference opponent. And unfortunately, the ball comes loose, goes through the back of the end zone, and Carolina turns it over right there. Reese Verhoff, chance before halftime to make a 50-yard field goal that would have given Carolina the lead at the half. He ends up knocking through the first attempt. Unfortunately, Tony Elliott calls timeout. The second attempt goes wide to the left. If he hits that, Carolina ends up winning the game if Carolina's defense continues to do what it did in that second half against Virginia. Andrew Simpson has the huge interception off of Chandler Morris late in the third. Carolina has great field position, but Gio Lopez throws late to the flat. That turns out to be an interception for Virginia on a ball that was batted up into the air, and eventually the Cavaliers come down with it. And then you go to the opportunity that, to me, really was probably the most frustrating in terms of the involvement of the coaching staff. And that was late in the game. Carolina with 22 seconds on the clock. It's first down and 10 on the Carolina 49 after a big penalty call that allowed Carolina to get across midfield. And you feel like, man, Carolina's in a good spot here. All they got to do is potentially get into field goal range and give Reese Verhoff a chance here at the end of regulation. Carolina instead draws up a play where they're going to take a shot down the field. They take the shot to Madrid Tucker, who saw his first action of the season in this game, was the guy that really took over for Shenard Clower after Clower fumbled last week. Carolina, wanting to get a look at one of the other true freshmen on the roster, throws him in there. He led the team in receptions, but they end up throwing a go ball to him, and what turns into a jump ball because Gio underthrows it just a little bit. He gets his hands on it, but the ball's batted up into the air and eventually intercepted. Why are you taking that shot at that point? It doesn't really make any sense to me. That's a poor job by, Freddie Kitchens at that point. I know there are some people, I was told today by some people that if they end up catching that ball, it puts them automatically in field goal range. So that shot made a lot of sense. To me, it really didn't, when you had a quarterback that was as inefficient as Gio Lopez was throwing down the field the entire day. And so I didn't really get that. And then, of course, the biggest one is the one at the end when Carolina comes up just inches short. It felt like there were so many chances for Carolina to be able to win this game. It was right in front of them, but this is a team that just wasn't able to take advantage of those opportunities, very similar to what we saw when they had an opportunity last week to win the game against Cal.
Yeah, but I do think what was different was last week, Carolina was down, 2-3 minutes into the game because of the early fumble. You were down, double digits, into the second half. You were trying to mount a comeback. There's a scenario where if Carolina is an average offense, if they're getting adequate quarterback play, this game, I'm not going to say it's not close, but Carolina wins this game by 2 possessions. But they're not equipped right now to do that. And I do think it does start and end with some of the decision making of Gio Lopez, the play calling of Freddie Kitchens. Definitely comes under fire. For me, it was when he initially threw the pick that at the end of regulation. I thought that it was a throw that maybe there wasn't a play there to be made on. Then you see the TV angle, and there was definitely a play that should have been made. If you're going to throw that ball, I would prefer you throw that to a Jordan Shipp, a Kobe Paysour, as opposed to a Madrid Tucker who was just making his presence felt at the college football level. So you have that where it's just okay. Maybe you're just banking on getting a pass interference penalty, but you can't call that with the hopes of, well, maybe we'll get bailed out by a flag. You as bad as the officiating was at times in that game, because Marcus Allen got called for the worst PI in the history of pass interferences. You can't bank on that happening, and it ends up not giving you a chance to win the game there in regulation. The big kicker to me, it felt like Carolina was going to lose no matter what they did, was you get the interception, Simpson gets his first pick as a Tar Heel, and then 3-4 plays later or whatever it was, Gio Lopez throws an inexcusable interception. And I say that because he threw a ball to an area where if he throws it 3 seconds sooner, the ball is completed. Because he had the man there, but for whatever reason, he was not confident, did not pull the trigger. He waits and waits and waits. The next thing you know, that ball gets deflected up in the air. It hangs up there for an eternity. Virginia comes down with the interception. And so that's the margins that this team is dealing with right now. They're not good enough to fumble the ball to the back of the end zone for a second straight week. They're not good enough to throw a pick in the red zone after getting a turnover that gave you that field position and come away with a win. In years past, Carolina with Howell, Drake Maye, those guys make the plays that that don't make this game a contest. Carolina wins the game going away. They're not equipped to do that right now. That's signs of a team and a program learning how to win under a new head coach. These are the typical growing pains you see in year one of a rebuild, year one of a coach trying to establish, a culture and an identity of what they're going to be as a football program. So it's a step in the right direction because it's, in some ways it's better than getting blown out, ran off the field like you were against the TCUs, the Central Floridas, and the Clemsons. And it does give you a picture of kind of how perfect they've got to be on offense to give themselves a chance here moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about it. It's about being efficient offensively. With the way that this offense is set up, with what Freddie Kitchens wants to do, it's not going to be an offense that's going to get a ton of possessions in games. So when you have those possessions, you've got to take advantage of those. Those possessions are precious to you. And unfortunately for Carolina, I mean, you look at it the last 2 weeks, what's really done them in? I mean, turnovers have been a big part of what's done them in. I know that in this game, you have 2 interceptions that get deflected up into the air and eventually get picked off. But you mentioned the one was very clearly on Gio. Just a bad throw, at the time. You're right. If he throws it earlier, I believe it was to Shenard Clower in the flat. Basically the same exact play that Benjamin Hall has on the 2-point conversion. If you throw that earlier, you end up picking up, a decent amount of yards. Shenard Clower, who knows what he does after the catch. Maybe that leads to something. You throw it a few seconds too late, the ball gets deflected up into the air, and all of a sudden it turns out to be an interception. The fumble through the back of the end zone can happen. Would have been a great way to set the tone early on in the game for Carolina, giving them a chance to control the game. Once again, they never did that. They never led in this game again. So that means that you are still against a power conference opponent yet to lead a game since you led 7-0 against TCU. That was the last time that you had a lead against a power conference opponent. So who knows what playing from ahead could actually do for Carolina. That's got to be a moment where you're holding on to the ball there. You're stretching that ball out, trying to make a play. You just can't do that. Not that early in the game. If you go down at the 1 yard line, it is what it is. We're going to hopefully pound it in with either a quarterback sneak from Gio Lopez or a handoff to Damon June. Something's going to happen that's going to allow Carolina to get into the end zone. You'd think like they did later in the game. That's what you're, preaching to Kobe Paysour, a guy that, we've talked about just how valuable he is to Carolina. I mean, he's your best receiver right now, but you need him to be a little more controlled with the football in that moment. And then, going to the throwdown field, at the end of regulation, to me, you had been conservative all game. That was the thing that didn't make any sense to me, was you were so conservative when it came to, some of the play calls on third down. It didn't feel like you were being that aggressive. And it seemed like to us, Gio, certainly wasn't great in this game. But the one thing that you did see from him was he was able to complete some of those short passes. That was the area where he was really shining, was the short passing game, the throws behind the line of scrimmage. You felt like all you got to do is just move it into field goal range here. Continue with that short passing game. Find a couple of throws here. You do have, I believe at that time, 2 timeouts. Just get into field goal range and give your guy at least an opportunity to kick. If he misses it, then we go to overtime and we just, go from there. It felt like that was too aggressive from Freddie Kitchens for a guy that's so conservative. Let's throw a ball, a go ball up down the sideline to a true freshman that, hadn't shown you that he was capable of making those plays, not at least from what we've seen during the game. He was a guy that was really making a lot of plays at or behind the line of scrimmage. That didn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. So, who knows? Maybe we'll get an explanation from Freddie if he talks later on this week. But that was certainly one that hurt. And then, red zone wise, Carolina, they took 5 trips to the red zone in this game, and they only come away with points 3 times. We talked about the 2 turnovers down there. They end up having to kick a field goal one of the times that they're down there. When you're taking on a team like Virginia, a team that is ranked, that has, been through some battles here so far this season, you need to be able to make plays down there in the red zone. Carolina gets there, but unfortunately comes up short. I think that, ultimately really was a lack of execution. I didn't look at it as, play calling that was bad or anything like that. I just think it was the lack of execution that leads to Carolina ultimately losing when it was all said and done.
Yeah, and what's really disappointing is if Carolina, especially if they put a touchdown on the board after the Simpson touchdown, you're now playing with the lead, and now like all the game pressure flips to Virginia. I think that's what's really frustrating, is because Carolina never took the lead, Virginia, I don't think they really ever panicked. And for a team that's never been in the spot that they've been in, what you want to make them do is panic. But because Carolina could never get with the lead and play with the lead, they just kind of were just able to grind out the victory they were able to earn. And and it was, what's really frustrating is you wasted a defensive performance, because you're still talking about an offense that has failed to crack the 20-point threshold against Power 4 competition. Look at the way this program, since Larry Fedora showed up, has routinely scored points. It hasn't really mattered who Carolina has played, the level of competition. For the last 12 to 15 years, Carolina's been able to put points on the board. And now we get into a situation where we can't even crack 20. And if you crack 20 on Saturday, you win the game theoretically by 2 possessions against a top 20 team. And now you have that signature win that you can sell to your fan base and to recruits and to the naysayers about what you're trying to establish within the halls of your football program. You can still say that you're taking steps in the right direction, but we're not here for moral victories. We're not here to almost win football games. That's not why Carolina made the financial investment that they made into Bill Belichick and into football. So I do think it's probably the most frustrating aspect of what we've seen the last 2 weeks, is because you've played good enough defensively to win. And if you just had any semblance of an average offense, we'd be sitting here at 4-3. And with the schedule that Carolina would have coming up, with games against Syracuse, NC State, and some others, a pathway to a bowl would be very much in play. But now you're 2-5, and you got to go 4-1 down the stretch if you want to go to a bowl game. I think Carolina defensively could give them a chance to do that. But where's your trust in the offense to be able to do that? And that still remains to be answered, because what they're doing offensively still doesn't make a whole lot of sense with the rotation of guys, whether it's at the running back spot. Like, this is another week where Benjamin Hall had the most carries of any running back. And yeah, he ran for the most yards, but it still doesn't make sense why he's getting runs more carries over Damon June. And yeah, Madrid Tucker has this breakout game, 8 catches for 41 yards, but why was he a bigger part of the game plan than the game plan than Kobe Paysor? That's the guy that should be given the benefit of the doubt, even if he does create or commit a mistake like he did with the fumble out of the back of the end zone. I still believe if this offense would commit to playing its best players more often and getting those guys the football more frequently, they'd at least be a little bit more explosive and dynamic than what we've seen so far. But we're 7 games in. It feels like every week we're going to see a different set of pass catchers. You're going to see a different rotation at the running back. But I can't help but think that's a big part why Carolina's offense has been as inept as it's been all year long.
Well, there's no continuity even in game. I mean, you're talking about the amount of times that guys are being shifted in and out of the game. I mean, it's just insane. I mean, guys are, getting on the field. They end up having 2 successful plays, and then, we're going to take you off because we're throwing somebody else out there. That's, how it felt at running back in this game, was that you saw moments where Benjamin Hall was the better running back, and he thought, okay, maybe they're going to stick with him here. Nope, he's off the field. All of a sudden, Davian Goss is in the game. Okay, well, Davian Goss, maybe they can get him going. Give him the football a little bit. Okay, now Damon June's checking back into the game. Now we're going to Jalen McGill. We're going to have him carry the football a little bit. It didn't make any sense. The rotations don't make sense. It's just throwing guys out there. I mean, honestly, you've gotten to the point now where on the offensive side of the ball, it really feels like you are basically just throwing things up against the wall and seeing what sticks, because you don't trust the guys that are out there. And I mean, yeah, I guess I get it to a certain extent. You haven't had guys go off, at the wide receiver position like Jordan Shipp, Kobe Paysor. They haven't necessarily had big games outside of Paysor's game against Cal. But, I mean, at the same time, I mean, how much of that is attributed to a quarterback that's just not playing well? I mean, I think that's part of the reason why they're struggling to make, any sort of effect in these games. I don't think it's that they are really struggling that badly. There were times the other day where we could see receivers that were open and Gio was just missing them, whether it was because of the pressure, just his eyes somewhere else on the field, something like that. It just felt like, there were opportunities there that weren't taken advantage of. And we've been feeling like that for most of the year. I mean, yeah, Madrid Tucker comes in, 8 catches, 41 yards. But again, he was a guy that was sort of in and out of the game. There were moments where he was playing a lot for Carolina. Then there were stretches of the game where he wasn't in there at all for Carolina. They're running Jordan Shipp in, as a bigger slot and using other guys in the game. So it's just about finding that continuity. We talked about it so much for Carolina early in the season. And on the offensive line, for the most part, they've done it. The one area that you see them changing guys out at is that left guard spot. You've had Will Osteen in there, and then they've been, using Miles McVay on and off, trying to find some sort of solution at that spot. I actually thought, the offensive line was probably one of the better elements of the game the other day. From the offensive standpoint, I thought they actually run blocked well. It didn't feel like there was nearly as much pressure on the quarterback in this game as there were in some of the other games. I thought for the most part, Carolina did a decent job, but looking at the pressure numbers, I mean, the offensive line did let up, 11 combined pressures from the tackles. Daniel King struggled in this game as well. So maybe there was a little bit more pressure than we thought. But, I mean, they definitely were a much better run blocking unit, which I think they do have to get credit for. But, yeah, I think it's, again, figuring out who are going to be the major, players for you moving forward. We just want a steady group out there that these are the contributors for Carolina. And we feel like we know who some of these guys are. We feel like there are guys that have clearly made impacts so far this year that should be out there, but the coaching staff seems to feel a little bit differently. You turn to the quarterback spot, and look, Gio Lopez, most completions that he's had so far this year, most passing yards that he's had so far this year, but it still feels like, man, he is just not giving you what you need at that quarterback spot, especially when it comes to throwing the ball downfield. We saw some moments where he, looked downfield, was trying to throw the ball to some of his guys, and was just frankly inaccurate. There were a few passes that were way off the mark, others that were a little bit closer, but simply weren't on target for his guys. And that's really the area where Kobe Paysour was trying to go to work, and he just couldn't get him the ball consistently throughout the day. I think that's the thing with Gio Lopez is we've learned exactly what he is. He's a guy that can win in the short passing game and behind the line of scrimmage. Those are the areas where he's going to shine. But Carolina doesn't necessarily have the receivers that are built to shine after the catch the way that maybe they were in years past, that they need to be this year. They'll probably look to find guys that can be a little bit more effective after the catch in this upcoming recruiting class. But I think Gio Lopez is showing you that he is a limited quarterback for a reason, and that Carolina probably at the end of the season has to look in a different direction to find their long-term solution at quarterback, because this is a game that they should have won. If you get adequate enough quarterback play, you do, and it just didn't feel like you got that from Gio Lopez.
Yeah, I think what really makes this so difficult when evaluating Gio is he's being asked to run and execute an offense that I don't think fits his skill set. So am I open to Carolina going portaling this offseason to find an upgraded quarterback? Absolutely. I think there's going to be some pretty good quarterbacks available that you probably need to go check in on. I also would be open and interested to seeing what does Gio Lopez look like in an offense that benefits his skill set and maximizes who he is as a runner and who he is as a thrower. Because it was Saturday was the first time you saw some designed run calls for him, but it felt like they were at the wrong time. They were at the wrong down and distance, the wrong spot on the field, but it was, okay, you're finally calling that. And I've said it all year long. He's a quarterback that is his rhythm comes from his running, meaning that when his feet get involved as a runner, it'll get him more calm, more poised, more confident as a thrower. But Carolina has done the opposite, where they've taken his running ability away from him, and they're asking him to stay inside a pocket and try to make throws that he's not equipped to make. He's a mobile thrower. You need to get him out on bootlegs and get him on the move and rolling out, and that's where he can either throw it or pull it down and run. So, yes, did the quarterback play hinder Carolina from winning the game on Saturday? Absolutely. And, there's been a lot of games where we can look at Gio Lopez and say, yeah, he's not a difference maker in a positive way. It's also not all his fault, man. And I don't want to come up here and just make excuses for him, but if this would have been the offense that I knew Carolina was going to run, then I would have told you when they brought him in, this was going to be a failed experiment. He does not fit. That's not what I believed. I thought Bill Belichick was going to run a modern college-like offense where they would be in the no huddle. They would be very RPO heavy, so on and so forth. That's no longer the case. Do they win this game with Max Johnson? Probably. But do I think Carolina's offensive issues are night and day differently with Max Johnson at the quarterback spot? No, I don't. I still think this offense would struggle to sustain drives. I still think this offense would struggle to put up the amount of points you got to put up every week to give yourself a chance to win. which leads me to the one thing that I still believe in, even over the last 2 weeks, where we've seen growth and progress and development. If Bill Belichick is serious about building a winner in Chapel Hill and he's committed to doing that, then there's no reason why after the NC State game that Freddie Kitchens remains employed as your offensive coordinator. He wants to be your tight end coach. By all means, he can go coach tight ends. I know he can do that. He cannot call plays, and so hopefully that is something that as Belichick is evaluating his staff on a week in, week out basis, he's already come to that conclusion. And once this season comes to an end, hopefully we're doing a podcast or two talking about our favorite OC candidates, because Freddie Kitchens does not need to be my play caller in 2026.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've all gotten to that point. I mean, that's one of the things that, when it comes to giving Belichick credit for, this turnaround for Carolina in the last 2 games, that it's still hard because he did choose to roll with Freddie Kitchens the rest of the season as his offensive coordinator. Now, maybe that's not the case. Maybe he wanted to get rid of him and they told him we don't have the money to get rid of him. Who knows? But my belief is that that conversation really wasn't had during these bye weeks. Now, part of it is that there was so much else going on that maybe they never really got around to it. But still, you've got to come to the conclusion at this point that, Freddie Kitchens just ain't the guy, man. You talked about it. I mean, with Gio, this is an offense that's not set up for him to succeed. And he called some more designed runs the other day. But you mentioned they came at the weirdest times. They came on 3rd and long. They end up running a quarterback draw that just did not make any sense. They run, I think that one came in the red zone. There were a couple other times where they tried to run him and it didn't necessarily work. You've got to have more strategic running plays. You've got to be able to block it right if you're going to be able to do it. It's not something that you can all of a sudden just throw into a game plan and hope that it works. And you can tell that when Carolina has run it, it's not something that has been worked on a lot during the week. And so, it's frustrating to watch this offense. I think, yes, at this point, you need to admit that you don't have the play caller and you probably don't have the quarterback, because the thing when it comes to Gio Lopez is that you could say that it's the offense that's just not fitting him, but and maybe that is true. Maybe if he did have an offense that fit him, some of the timing issues would be better. Some of the, in terms of throwing with anticipation, he would be able to do that a little bit better, considering that he knew the playbook like the back of his hand. I don't know if it's still that he just did not learn the playbook quick enough when he came into Carolina. I'm not sure. But it just doesn't look right at certain times. You saw through the middle portion of this game, Gio really struggled. That was an area where Carolina would have been able to take advantage, potentially take that lead, and maybe even add to it. And, if they would have been able to get to that 20-point threshold that you talked about, you feel pretty good about Carolina being able to win this game. That's the frustrating part, is that right now this defense is playing incredibly well and they're not being rewarded. And when you look at it, it looks like an offense that's just under the guidance of an extremely limited quarterback that at times just looks afraid to make mistakes. And it looks like a group that you just don't, you can't tell who's going to be out there from play to play. Like, you have absolutely no clue who are the impact players for Carolina offensively. Every time that we think that we know somebody is going to be an impact player for this group offensively, it seems like their playing time gets cut, or there's a guy that comes in and starts playing their position a little bit more for some reason, because I don't know, maybe he had a better day, a better week of practice, something like that, where there are certain guys, I'm not saying that they don't need to give any effort in practice, but there are certain guys that you should know. A guy like Damon June, the way that he played early in the season, you should be leaning on him as your number one back. You found your guy. You need to lean on him. It doesn't feel like Carolina's doing that. And the fact that some of these guys on the offensive side of the ball, there just doesn't seem to be any trust in any of these guys, I think is certainly hurting this offense as well. All right. I mentioned that Carolina got a commitment in the 2026 class. We'll get to that here in just a second, but I did want to tell you guys really quickly about our sponsor, Legacy Arcade. Make sure you guys go use the promo code there, HEELS, for up to $100 in free play. Legacy Arcade and Social Casino is a place where you can win cash prizes with roulette, blackjack, your favorite multiplayer or your favorite slot games and multiplayer fish games. You can also win prizes playing your favorite arcade games. All you got to do is use that promo code HEELS to get up to $100 in free match play at registration. It's safe, secure, and has 24-hour customer support. Instant redemption immediately to your bank account or card, whichever you use on the website. Whenever you win, it'll immediately go into your account. They accept all major credit cards, Skrill and ACH. So any of those credit cards that you want to use on their website, they do accept them, and they do have Apple Pay that is coming soon. So make sure you head over there to Legacy Arcade and check that out. Use that QR code right there to get up to $100 in free play. All right. The commitment for Carolina in the 2026 class, that's Jaziel Hart, the 3-star cornerback who was at one time committed to Penn State. He comes out of the state of Virginia, so Carolina going to Roanoke to pick up this commitment. This is a pretty big one for Carolina. Basically replaces the departed Amari Johnson, who left behind a spot at corner. He's back on the market for some of his local teams down there in Mississippi, some of the other schools that he was considering. What a weird recruitment that was. I mean, we mentioned it, I think, a couple weeks ago when he ended up decommitting. But he's a guy that I think ultimately wants to play wide receiver, had been sold on that from some of the other schools, ends up committing to Carolina originally, decommitting, and then committing back to Carolina earlier this summer. He was a guy that it looked like was then bought in on being a cornerback, but now I think has sort of rethought that. Ole Miss has had some renewed interest in him, and so he ends up leaving, and that opens up a spot, and Carolina goes out and gets Jaziel Hart. And, when you look at Jaziel Hart, there's a lot to like about his game. Really athletic kid, plays both sides of the football, plays a little bit of special teams for North Cross High School there in Roanoke. He is certainly a guy that's going to make an impact regardless of if he is on the field at cornerback. If he's, a guy that needs to be, a special teams member for a few years, it feels like he can make that impact either as a returner or, as someone on one of those coverage units. Really like everything that you see from him. I mean, really strong tackler, which is something that, could come in handy if he is one of those guys that has to play on special teams. But more importantly, I mean, as a coverage guy, there's a lot to like about him. Carolina's looking for guys that are a little bit more successful as man coverage corners. This is a guy that has that ability. I think you look at the way that he gets his hands on guys on the outside. He's very physical. That's something that Carolina definitely needs on the outside. They need someone that if they are going to play press man, they're going to be physical at the line of scrimmage. That's something that you would expect from a Stephen Belichick defense, a Bill Belichick defense at that. So I think that's certainly something that he brings to the table, something that really jumps off the page for him. And then, he has really good closing speed too, really fast guy overall, but does a good job of breaking on the football, plays the ball well. And his background as a receiver does allow him to succeed when it comes to taking away the football. So certainly a lot to like about him. He's a guy that I think is probably going to be the second best corner that Carolina's brought in this class. Of course, Kenton Dobson, the guy that Carolina flipped from Miami, the most recent commit before this commitment from Jaziel Hart. That's the most talented cornerback in the room. That's the guy that you look at and say has a chance to play year one. But I do think Jaziel Hart is a guy that quickly could become part of the rotation for Carolina because of his aggressiveness. I think that's certainly something to keep an eye out here on over the next, couple of years for Carolina. And with the commitment, Carolina now up to 38 commitments in the 2026 class. This is, a class that is huge, and Carolina is not shying away from the fact that it's only going to get better They're only going to be bringing in more guys. I mean, this is a class that really doesn't feel like it has a limit. If they are talented enough, Carolina is going to bring these guys in, and they're going to see what ultimately sticks. So this is going to be a huge freshman class. I think they're, going to try to limit the amount of transfers that they bring in, because they really do want to build it from, the ground up. And it feels like the fact that they didn't have maybe the most success that they could have with the transfer portal this time around is definitely something that's weighing on their minds. So they want to go through the high school ranks, and that's why they're bringing in such a big class. And talent-wise, I mean, this class is starting to get up there. They're starting to get some better players in there, some guys that are ranked right near or inside of that top 500. Jaziel Hart is a guy that's just outside of that top 500, but could get there by the end of the season, especially if, some of the film starts to show, that he is just as impactful as he was last year on the defensive side of the ball. Some of the film that I watched shows that he is pretty impactful just about everywhere on the field, but, doesn't really focus enough on the defensive side of the ball, I think, to allow him to climb some of those ranks. But we'll see. The recruiting websites are always a little weird. That's one website that has him outside of that top 500. That's 24/7 Sports, which is what I always go off of. But Rivals has him as a guy that's a 4-star prospect that's inside of that top 500. So definitely a lot of guys that Carolina's bringing in that have that blue chip type talent that they're looking for here in this class. Last thing that I wanted to talk about before we get out of here, and as I mentioned, there's a couple of guys that are really having big seasons at the NFL level for Carolina. The one that everybody wants to talk about, of course, is Drake Maye. But Javonte Williams also having some success. Wasn't a great performance against the Denver Broncos, but he did find the end zone twice, 13 carries, 41 yards, 2 touchdowns for him. So far this year, Javonte has 633 yards, 8 touchdowns, is definitely having a bounce back year in that system for the Dallas Cowboys. But the guy that everybody is talking about around the NFL is Drake Maye. He has been simply unbelievable here over the last 3 games. This is really where he settled in. And as you would expect, I mean, these are some of the lesser teams in the league. But after picking up that big win against the Bills earlier in the season, some were wondering how would he be able to build on that. Well, he's come out against the New Orleans Saints, 261 yards, 3 touchdowns, a quarterback rating of 140.1. Against the Titans, 222 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions, 135.9 passer rating. And then yesterday against the Browns, 282 yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception, with a 135.8 passer rating. One thing I forgot to mention in that game against the Titans, completed 91.3% of his passes, which broke a franchise record for the Patriots. Of course, that was held by Tom Brady. But when you look at what Drake Maye is doing so far this year, 75.2% completions so far for 2,026 yards, 15 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions. I mean, what are your thoughts on just how well we've seen Drake Maye perform early on this season? I mean, I know, got to be just like me, incredibly happy with what we're seeing. And do you think that he actually has a chance to win the MVP this year?
Yeah, MVP might be a stretch. It might be something that we're too early on, but he's playing like the number 3 pick in the quarterback or in the draft should play. And it really just reflects on how poorly he was coached a year ago to where he is right now. And it's why Josh McDaniels is one of the best offensive coordinators of all time, because, he just knows how to coach that position, and he's got someone as talented as Drake. And this is still a wide receiver room that isn't great. It's kind of a group that does it by committee, including former Tar Heel Matt Collins. But he doesn't have a dynamic wide receiver like, a Jamar Chase or someone like that. They can run the ball, but it's not like they're always running the ball consistently. He has become the focal point of that offense. Like, they go as he goes, and they go quite a bit because they've moved the football up and down the field here at recent weeks. It really started with that win over Buffalo, his first big primetime moment. He outduels Josh Allen, and they've kind of taken off us ever since. So it's been a lot of fun. It's been a lot of fun watching that Boston media that was uber critical of him after his first 10, 12 games or so have to kind of eat their words because he's playing at such a high level. I'm not going to say the MVP this year, but could it be 2-3 years down the road? Absolutely. And that's what you expected from him when he got drafted number 3 overall. And that's what the Patriots have. They were looking for that successor post Tom Brady. They went Mac Jones first. That failed. They've now found their next guy in Drake Maye, who I think is poised to lead them to the playoffs this year. And the first of many, many times they'll be playing meaningful football in Foxborough deep into January and maybe once again February.
Yeah, I mean, I think anything is really possible in the AFC this year. I mean, it feels like the AFC is pretty wide open unless, Kansas City with what they're doing here recently really puts it all together. But who is that biggest challenger to them right now in the AFC? I don't know. You'd like to say that it's Buffalo. Some people would like to say that it's Buffalo. But, I mean, as they've shown you, there are moments where they just don't look the part. I mean, they got beat by an Atlanta team that got absolutely killed yesterday by Miami. So I do think that there's a chance that New England could surprise some people in the postseason, could make a little bit of a run. In terms of the MVP, yeah, you're probably asking a little bit too much in year 2. I think that as he goes further down the line, he could certainly get into that conversation. But I do question, with him matching up against the likes of Patrick Mahomes, guys that are a little bit more popular in the league, guys that, certainly have a little bit more of a track record. How does he match up with those guys? I don't know if he necessarily stacks up perfectly with them to be able to overcome them in the MVP race, but you never know. I mean, anything that's been thrown at him so far this year, he's really been able to do. I mean, look, we're going to figure out just how good he is, with some of the games that he has remaining on the schedule. I mean, he does have, a game at Tampa. He does have a game against the Buffalo Bills at home and then a game at the Baltimore Ravens. But this is a pretty forgiving schedule outside of that. The Atlanta Falcons coming up this week. That's going to be interesting to see ultimately how Atlanta responds to being blown out. But that's a game that definitely feels winnable. You've got 2 games against the Jets still on the schedule. You've got a game against the Miami Dolphins that still remains. The New York Giants on the schedule with all the injury issues that they've suffered. The Cincinnati Bengals, who we saw just get beat by the Jets. So there are plenty of teams that he'll be able to potentially take advantage of. It's just, can he put up gaudy enough stats? The thing is regardless of what happens, I think it's just an amazing story to watch him succeed the way that he has succeeded, because you go back to when he was drafted and there were so many guys, so many really harsh takes on him, where even if you felt like he was a guy that didn't necessarily have a chance to succeed, I mean, Merrill Hodge said this was a guy that had zero chance of succeeding in the league, that he was a guy that was going to get you fired as a GM if you ended up picking him. So you were either really for Drake Maye or you were really against Drake Maye. And so to see him succeeding the way that he is, as quickly as he is, I think it's a great story. I know that a lot of people around the league aren't going to be super excited that, the New England is all of a sudden back in the conversation as quickly as they are. I think a lot of people hope that they will be down for a little bit longer. But for us on the Tar Heel side of things, it's a great story. It's something to follow this year in the NFL. And we'll keep doing that, of course, here on the podcast side of things. We'll keep you updated on everything that's going on with Drake and Javonte as they go throughout the remainder of the season. Other news that came down today, Michael Carter, the veteran running back for the Arizona Cardinals and a former Tar Heel, he did end up getting released, unfortunately. So he'll be looking for another new home here during the rest of the regular season and potentially into the offseason. But that's going to wrap it up for this edition of the podcast. Guys, head over to the website, HeelToughBlog.com. Got an article up there breaking down Jaziel Hart a little bit more in depth for you guys, so make sure that you go and check that out. got my recap article up there. Did go up later on yesterday, just trying to, get a bunch of different takeaways packed into that thing, and then wanted to get through at least the Panther game yesterday before I put that up for you guys. So it did get up there late, but do want you guys to go back and check that out, where I go a little more in depth than we did even here on the podcast about some of my takeaways from the game. There's one in there about the officiating. We didn't even get to fully officiating. I mean, a call that I think should be talked about a little bit more with the marking of Chandler Morris on that third down attempt in overtime. It looked like he came up short. Carolina would have had a chance to stop him on fourth down, could have ended up, keeping Virginia out of the end zone and potentially, kept them from scoring any points. And boy, how that would have been different for Carolina, because then all you would have had to do was find the end zone, and you could have won the game or potentially even kicked a field goal and won the game. So go over there to the website, check that out at HeelToughBlog.com. Of course, we got plenty of coverage coming up for you guys here on the basketball side of things as well. We had you covered for the exhibition. Josh had you covered with the recap, and now he's getting you ready with what to watch for the game against Winston-Salem State that will take place on Wednesday evening. So make sure that you guys are checking that out. Of course, on the podcast side of things, we had that what to watch for the Winston-Salem State game that ran earlier this evening. Make sure you go back and check that out. And plenty of other content that's coming your way on the basketball side of things right on these same channels where you watch the Heel Tough Blog podcast. We'll be back on Thursday to preview the game against Syracuse. Remember that it is a Friday game, so it is going to be a short turnaround this week, but we will have you guys on Thursday night for that one. We'll keep it the same time that we normally do, just because of how the rest of the week is laid out. So make sure that you guys are keeping up with all those episodes on either the Facebook page, the Twitter page, at Heel Tough Blog for both of those. And then, of course, over on the YouTube page, all you got to do is search Heel Tough Blog and give us that subscription if you could. We are right there, guys, very close to getting to 500 subscribers, thanks to you guys, and we want to continue to push those numbers up as we look for more sponsors. We've talked about how important that is to a lot of those sponsors that we have big YouTube numbers. So that wraps it up once again for this edition. Want to thank Josh for hosting with me. Want to thank you guys for watching and listening. And as always, go Tar Heels.